All right, guys, I think we're going to get started. So, thank you very much for spending some time with us today. We're really excited for this panel. My name is Henry Langer. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success here at Julius. And I'm just joined by Zany Shifaroff from Day One Agency, our awesome partner. And we're here with the ones to include. This is the marriage of two initiatives that we've had at Julius and Day One Agency, respectively. That really focus on underrepresented creators. So, on the Day One Agency side, it is, the ones to know. And on Julius's side, it's influencers for inclusion. We've been using those two platforms to highlight underrepresented creators over the course of the past few months and years. So, really excited for this. Thank you for spending some time with us today. And I'm going to pass over to Zany to talk a little bit about the panel.
Thanks, Henry. Hi, everyone. I'm Zany Shifra. I'm Senior Director at Day One Agency. We're a creative communications agency in New York, LA, Chicago, and basically everywhere now because of 2020. But as Henry mentioned, really the impetus for this panel is really sort of born out of a shared passion across Julius and Day One to really try to acknowledge our responsibility to shine a light on these important conversations around inclusion within the influencer marketing space, a role that both of us as, different stakeholders on the agency side and on the data side, do have a role in. From a marketing spend perspective, it's roughly estimated that around $10 billion will be spent in 2020 across the influencer marketing industry. So we know that marketers will continue to invest in this channel as it grows. It's obviously fairly new when you look at the larger, marketing ecosystem. So it's really important that we have this conversation and bring inclusion to the forefront so that it can be, core to how marketers think about influencer marketing. So we'll talk about 3 different topics today. The first is state of the industry. The second will be creator discovery. And the third will be brand strategy. We're gonna ask that everyone hold your burning questions until the end. We'll leave about 10 minutes for the Q&A piece, and you could use the Q&A function below your screen to drop in any questions, and we'll address them towards the end. And lastly, but certainly not least, I'm thrilled to introduce some of our amazing creators and panelists who are joined with us here today. First is amazing and talented creative director, Grace. Grace, you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm super excited about the conversations we're going to be having, and I think it's a very critical moment to have these conversations. So thank you again for putting this together. As Amy mentioned, my name is Grace Lukumi, and I'm a creative director, photographer, stylist, and just work in the creative field in art and fashion and also music-centric works. And I've been privileged to be part of the influencer network, I would say, for the last 2 years. It was definitely an accidental like a great stumble into it, just because I was working with these great brands that had, interests in sharing different perspective and having a different voice into the pieces and content that they were making. And as a former content director, I was able to initiate the strategies that I practice into the work that I create as a photographer and a stylist, and kind of overarch it as art director and creative director. And that's been very interesting as far as formalizing that into a career. But I've been fortunate that a lot of brands understand that and do invest in influencer marketing to the point that they understand that it's very important to have a multidimensional creative who can also be the front face of the brand. So it's been a very interesting place to play in, but I'm really grateful that I'm here, that I'm playing in it, and I'm very excited to see how it grows and becomes more inclusive next, in the following years to come.
Thank you. Next, we have travel expert and entrepreneur, soon to be authoress, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. As she said, I'm Jessica Nabango, and I'm a travel expert, travel influencer, so many different things. I feel like I wear a lot of hats. But for the last well, I think I'll just say that what I'm most known for is becoming the first Black woman to visit every country in the world last year, which is awesome. So 2020 has been strange for me. But I operate as a content creator, working mostly in the travel industry, but doing some more lifestyle work nowadays with the pivots. Really excited about today's conversation. I think it's incredibly important and happy to lend my voice and my experience to the conversation.
Awesome, thank you. Last and certainly not least, we have creative director, videographer, photographer extraordinaire, Toby.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool, hi. Similar to Jessica and Grace, I wear a number of hats as well. Primarily known on social media for my photography, my videography. I'm also a creative director as well. Head of social media for a small company as well. So there's a number of things I do, kind of like the 9 to 5, the 5 to 9. And then in addition to that, I worked with Day One Agency on some influencer style projects. And yeah, it's an interesting time in the world to be paid to do something that you enjoy doing. And to, you know, with the travel aspect of everything, with all the travel restrictions and just, it's a very interesting time to, I guess, have those conversations around like diversity, inclusion, because it's absolutely necessary. And yeah, I'm excited to be a part of the conversation. So thank you for having me.
Great, guys. Well, thank you very much for those introductions. So guys, I want to kick off the conversation with a question to each of the three of you. So, you know, I want to look back at 2020 because it really felt like the year where this conversation in the influencer marketing industry came to the forefront. So, you know, I kind of want to talk about the trends that we've seen this year and the way that we're seeing this conversation change. So Grace, I want to start with you. You know, you've been both behind the camera, in front of the camera. What have you noticed? What trends can you speak about in terms of, you know, how this conversation is starting to grow?
I definitely think there has been more of a movement towards authenticity. I think that's been a buzzword over the years, but I think with everyone having to stay at home and really identify what is, you know, moves them, what encourages them, what inspires them. Brands have had to really reflect on the content that they're putting out and the people that they're choosing to reflect on, you know, to advertise their products and really do some soul searching. And I think that's been the overarching just trend as far as being more inclusive and trying to understand, even if it's not inclusive off the bat, but trying to understand how they haven't been and how to improve that in the future. I feel, you know, that there is definitely been, I've experienced from either working at home and being sent product and creating product like that, or being on set, that people are a lot more friendlier, I would say, and just open to new ideas and new ways of creating. And I think that it's kind of a thing of both like interest and fear. But it's been a very interesting trend just to see that evolve over the landscape of the last like 8 months, I would say.
And Toby, you know, you have an interesting perspective as well, right? Because you've been on the brand side, the agency side, the creative side. Are there any sort of tipping points throughout, you know, the evolution of this conversation that, you know, you've witnessed that are notable?
I think at its peak, just because of some of the events that happened this year, some of the unfortunate events, but which have led to conversations being had, necessary conversations needing to be had. At its peak, we saw a lot of companies kind of putting out these statements, you know, familiar with the template, right? Black background, white text saying, you know, we stand with Black people, you know, we accept that the industry hasn't been doing enough with regard to inclusion, diversity, equity, and all of the buzzwords and stuff. And I think for me, being on both sides, it was very interesting to sit in the conversations and hear people talk about like, what do we do now, right? Like, do we say something? Do we stay quiet? Because I think for so many companies, I think some companies have, when they think about it, they probably know their base, right? Some companies know their target demographic. They should know if they're running the company properly, they know the target demographic and they know they're probably going to offend certain people. And so some people kind of caught in this kind of paralysis where they're like, well, we might offend these people, but if we don't do this, we might get cancelled, and they have this kind of back and forth. And sitting in those conversations was very interesting as a Black male, as a Brit in the States as well, just having this kind of removed perspective, and then the inception of having a secondary perspective to then give it like this other kind of lens. So it was, not to overuse the term interesting, but it was very eye-opening to see what people are prepared to do when the chips are down, right? Because the way I was raised is you do right whether people are watching or not, right? And I think some people were like, oh, well, if we sit back and let this blow over, maybe we don't need to do anything, right? Because some people are scared, and so they don't want to necessarily do anything about that. And that was eye-opening. But then the flip side is, do you want people just doing stuff in a performative way? Do you want people just putting up the, Blackout Tuesday, just putting up a black square which says, we stand with? It's like, it's all well and good for, a sportswear brand or, a travel company to put this stuff out there because they don't want to get cancelled. I don't think there's any simple answer as well. Sorry, I should have prefaced everything I'm saying with, I don't think there's a simple answer to this. I'm not sure you can just say, this is the answer. But I will say the opposite side to the paralysis of not doing anything and hoping that it's going to blow over is putting out this kind of statement which looks like it was written from a template or copied from somewhere else kind of thing. And then you're saying one thing, but then your actions in terms of, if you look at the breakdown of their C-suite, all the CEOs, all their senior management, and you're seeing a lack of diversity. It's like you're saying one thing, but you're doing another. So on the agency side of things, that's what I was seeing, right? From a personal perspective, as an influencer, my followers started to go up. And I had my Caucasian counterparts and friends and colleagues who I've made in social network over time saying stuff to me, or not saying stuff to me, but like kind of promoting me and saying, here's a dope Black photographer you should follow. And I'm like, all right, cool, I'll take it. I'm sure there's been times when I haven't got jobs. No, and the sad and insidious thing about racism or any sort of isms or discrimination is you never really know whether you didn't get something because of something. You may suspect, but you never really quite know, right? So I suspect there's been times when I may have not got jobs because of certain characteristics I have, right? This was a weird one where I was getting followers, I suspect partially, well, I know a lot of my white colleagues and non-Black colleagues were like, Toby's this amazing, talented photographer, you should go follow him, right? And so I was reaping the benefits of the aftermath of that. Ideally, it shouldn't be like that. Ideally, people just follow people based on talent and so on and so forth. But I just saw it as these are the cards I've been dealt. I'm going to take it. I'm not going to turn people down. Having said that, I do think it evened itself out because with my platform and with the kind of person I want to be, I feel it's necessary for me to speak about certain issues. And I'm very certain I lost followers as a result of me being socially conscious, socially aware, and wanting to do the right thing. So me talking about Breonna Taylor, me talking about George Floyd, and the multitude of unfortunate events that went on during the summer meant that I had this kind of weird offset. I really will never know algorithm-wise, gaining-wise, losing-wise. I'll never really know the full effects of this summer of madness that we've had, but it's been interesting, to use that word again, and eye-opening to see the effects both on an agency side and a personal side.
Yeah, thank you, Toby. That perspective is really helpful. It's interesting to hear it cut both ways. And, I think you brought up a perfect segue into my question for Jessica, which is, specific industries where we maybe see more diversity and inclusion, less diversity and inclusion. I think, Jessica, your perspective as someone in the travel space is really something that, brings a really cool element to this because, it's traditionally been a little bit different. So we'd like to hear a little bit about your perspective here.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's a great question. And I think when you look at, for example, the beauty industry, they're sort of forced to have a focus on diversity. And granted, that wasn't always the case. I think Fenty, who certainly wasn't the first brand to bring forth the entire color spectrum, has done well to shift the beauty industry in terms of the offering. You know, I'm quite dark skinned, so like I knew I can't just go to a drugstore and get foundation for myself. That just wasn't, unless I wanted fashion fair, and I'm not, you know, that you typically that was for older women. So Fenty has revolutionized the beauty industry, and that now it's more inclusive because that brand came in and forced the industry to change. But it's interesting because I was looking at a Fast Company article, and despite the fact that in June and July, they were showing like more diverse faces across social media, now in October, November, they're seeing that it's actually gone back to pre-June numbers. So that's the beauty industry, which I think in general shows more diversity than other industries. But in the travel industry, it's just white. Like it has been, you know, what we saw last year was that Nat Geo put out an apology for the way that they've exploited non-white people around the world for a century, you know, and I have been operating in this, I mean, I've been traveling internationally since I was 4, working professionally in this space for the last 6 years or so. And I haven't really seen a change. There are some brands that are trying to do better. But I think, you know, we still have a long way to go. And what I try to do in my like personal dealings with brands is I'm open and I'm honest. And I tell brands what they're doing wrong. You know, I think we all had that spike in June and July of brands reaching out and having these campaigns, but they were one-offs. I'm like, hi, where are you guys now? Can I get another campaign? You know, so I think for me, and to Grace's point, I've always used the word authenticity, and I like to work with brands that allow me to be who I am. And to Toby's point, they're not just coming to me because I'm Black in this space, they're coming to me because I bring value to their brands, right? And I'm also accessing an audience that they need to access. And so for me, it's important that the brands just allow me to do my thing, like understanding the brand guidelines and looks and feels and all of that, but it's like you're coming to me to allow me to do my thing. And I think that's one thing brands have to do to move forward in that.
Yeah, Jessica, you already gave some good examples. You know, Fenty, I think, you know, obviously huge leader of the pack and making sure that not only did they create products, you know, for every single kind of skin tone, but that they also marketed them equally, right? That was a revolutionary thing. Can you guys think of any other, you know, just for, you know, for the people on this call who are trying to learn about, you know, the way to do it right? Can you guys think of any other really best in class marketing campaigns that were a good example of really diversity, inclusion, you know, featuring underrepresented creators, talking about topics that might be a little bit difficult?
What's somebody, Grace might have to help me out. What is it? The All-American, or there's a denim.
Aerie, American, is it American Eagle?
No, one of the Kardashians was in the campaign.
Good American?
Good American, yes. Good American. I think that they did a really good job because, you know, a lot of times when we talk about diversity, people focus on race. I talk about tone, like skin tone, because a lot of times they'll bring in a mixed race woman and that's the only Black representation. So people like me are never seen, but they're like, we have a Black girl. But I think that it's skin tone, it's race, but it's also body type, right? And so I liked Good American because they had, you know, girls who were full figured, but skinny girl, you know, I felt like they did a really good job of doing like a very diverse campaign.
I think across the photo and social space, I got to do a really cool campaign with Polaroid, and it was called Amplify Black Voices. And I think at the start of the movement, it was very critical and also weird time, as many brands were just tossing random ideas into the buckets. And it became almost a thing as a creator to really evaluate if they were reaching out based on skin color or based on being part of an initiative or movement, or really authentically, again, trying to navigate how to be better allies and support more. And with Polaroid, they were a company that actually, you know, one of the first ones that I ended up working with, because they came to me and they're like, what do you want to do? How can we make a difference through you. And all the campaigns we worked with previously have been around that same thing of making a difference. So they literally just told me to do whatever I wanted and let me pick which charities I wanted to invest in. And that was a really beautiful campaign. I ended up doing with like 20 people in our community. So something like that was, I think it's authentic. It's, we worked every day at the campaign, like in the morning, we're like sending ideas, caption. I'm working with the team in Amsterdam. It was very collaborative. So that was a really great moment for me. And then I also worked on a campaign with Instagram called Making Sure to Share Black Stories. And that was a really great initiative because they've been doing that before the movement kind of kicked off. And they, once they saw the great need for it, they amplified that even further and invested more money into the project. So I think those examples were really great. While some other examples that I've received of companies just being like, hey, we need 20 Black people to comment on how they like, how things are going in these clothes, and we need them in 4 days. So there, I actually got a few campaigns like that. And for those, I felt like it was my duty to kind of ignore it, because at that point, you're just trying to mine people of color to make sure that your brand is coming off well. And unfortunately, those brands specifically were under a lot of fire. So it wouldn't even, I think personally, I couldn't morally work with them at that time. So I think there's just a differentiation of brands between again, what's real and what's fake. Like, who are you talking to? Have you spoken to them before? Do you know anything about them? Worked with an incredible campaign with Day One for Maserati, and they approached me like, we've been watching you work. We've seen these parts of you, and we want you to create a story around that, instead of like, you're Black, this is happening right now, do something about it.
like the importance is really around the story, like being able to tell your story and being able to, use the brand's platform as a way to sort of work together to tell that story. That sounds like, the common theme. Jessica and Toby, obviously you guys are slightly different perspectives. Do you agree with that? Is that kind of the overarching sort of message of what's working right now? Or is there anything else that we're kind of missing in terms of summarizing sort of what's going right?
Just to finish off on your last question, I think about good examples of people doing. I know Adobe has made good efforts to be very diverse. It's a company I've worked with for quite a while, and I'm one of their Lightroom ambassadors. And if you look at the diversity in the Lightroom ambassador team, it's great. I think, and to lead into your next question, I think in terms of what brands can be doing to just to shore things up and just make it better is, I think this has been lost in the influencer space for some strange reason, but when you start to actually care about the people that you're working with and listen to them, then you're gonna have meaningful connections anyway. I think in this age when everything is we're so apparently connected, obviously, FaceTime, WhatsApp, all these different things. I think we're the most technologically connected, but like in real life, we're the most disconnected at all times. And I think that the influencers are that kind of place to bridge a gap. So brands if they have meaningful connections with the influencers and you make that influencer happy, they're going to ultimately connect with their audience and share that happiness, and there's meaningful connections there. And I think that's what brands need to be doing. So obviously this talk is about diversity, but I feel that if you just treat people with basic human decency, diversity will naturally happen. It doesn't have to be hard. So I often get kind of confused sometimes when people say, oh, it's hard to find good talent, or it's hard to find the right people and stuff. It's like, if you're treating people generally decently, then it's kind of like this karma thing where you will attract good people. And just, I don't know, maybe I'm taking it too far off into the spiritual, but I do think generally, the relationship I have with Zany is we've got this, when we see each other, we talk, we have that connection, we talk, we care. Oh, how was your week, man? I haven't spoken to you in a little while, but how have you been? That genuine care. It doesn't need to be like fake, but that genuine care, I think it helps. And I think that's lacking in the industry right now.
I think,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead, Henry.
No, please, Amy.
I think you bring up actually two really good points. I think one is yes, from a brand perspective, I do think they need to move, or brands hopefully, and this industry needs to sort of move in a direction that is more relationship based. Even with like the, and I don't want to take us off course too much because I'm looking at the clock, but even with the rise of that handle influencer pay gap that was calling out different brands, and sort of like there was anonymous submissions of different influencers, and the experiences that they've had with different brands as compared to their white counterparts, beyond like the equity pieces around like payment for what they were partnering, or what their expectation was in terms of partnering with a brand, even the level of professionalism that some were getting or receiving, likely though, most of the time, those who were of minority groups versus their white counterparts was really different. And to Toby's point, like, yes, in an ideal world, ideally, like everyone is like looked at equally and everyone is treated as a human being. And therefore, like our biases aren't coming into play when we're strategizing about like what's the right way to get a message out or to tell a brand story, and who are the right people to help us do that, that can connect to these communities we want to reach. But unfortunately, like that's not the reality, right? Which is why we're having this conversation, because I think the hope is that we can start to move in that direction. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit about allyship, because that is also an important piece. Like there's no point in talking about inclusion within the influencer space amongst just people who, you know, have the sideline conversations or like have the little look that Toby and I talked about. But it really, it's like, it's a responsibility, hopefully, of everyone, which is why we're here today. And Henry, I know you have a personal passion for this like point of view as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, obviously as the representative on this panel who, you know, isn't African American or isn't in the underrepresented community, like it's impossible for me to, you know, really relate to what we're talking about, but I can empathize with it. And obviously all we can do as people who, you know, might not be able to have gone through these experiences that we're talking about is help move the conversation forward. So I think, you know, some of the questions around allyship are really important for everyone on this call.
So I want to talk a little bit, dive a little bit deeper into that. So social media is obviously moving faster than ever. We talked about a little bit about everyone posting the black squares and if that was a good or a bad thing. You know, there's obviously a lot of chatter around a critical discussion that's important to all of us here. So when it comes to this, like sort of growing and emerging industry that even like the guidelines are being built like while the train is moving, right? So how important is it to our panelists for us to have allies across, whether it's agencies, platforms, industry organizations or industry professionals, other creators themselves, and what role do you hope or wish they play? And we spoke about it a little bit earlier, Toby, but I don't know if you want to build on that at all.
Yeah, sure. I feel this is one of those conversations that's like almost a can of worms. I'm just going to speak my truth, and then hopefully people can relate to that on whatever level, right? I feel like as a Black male, I've had to question certain things that I have and certain things that I don't necessarily have and that I would like to have. And what I mean by that is I recognize my privileges and my blessings, because as someone who's Black, I face certain prejudices. As a male, there's certain things which I get and I don't have to deal with. And I try my best to empathize with Black women and women of color and women in general where I can, because I don't want to be a hypocrite and I don't want to sit in a place and not recognize the blessings that I have, because I recognize that, you know, women of color and especially Black women in Western societies seem to be treated in a way where you have like this kind of duality. And if you're not willing to accept intersectionalism, then there's problems there. You know, I think the world needs a bit more empathy now in general. I think a lot of people assume that because something's not a problem for them, it's not a problem. And I feel that there's just a lot of work that just needs to be done. People just need to pay attention. Like I said, treating people like a decent human being is the key. And I really feel that for me in my position, I have to work as an ally. When there's a time for me to speak up and when there's a time for me to be quiet and listen. That's the learning I've been trying to take on myself, because I don't want to ask someone for something that I'm not doing myself. And so I'm gonna hand over to you because I'm realizing there's 3 intelligent Black women here who can tell me how we can grow. So yeah, I'm here to listen.
You brought up a good point and I want to use that to Jessica to talk to you a little bit, because I know, you obviously have a very strong opinion and point of view, specifically when it comes to the more luxury premium spaces and the lack of diversity. So what is it that you are, hopefully looking to hear or see, or how do you want to be approached, like from these like allies, whether it's brands, platforms, agencies? Obviously if you have any examples, great, but maybe it's more about what you hope or, wish for the future.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think of the role of an ally, and particularly in this space, and on the brand side, it's not someone who's like arm in arm, like patting, like it's gonna be okay, I'm here to listen. To me, it's like you need to be out in front of it, because the ally is sitting at the table where I'm not sitting. So it can't so you can't, sit back and listen to me talk because I'm not there. So to me, the ally has to be the person in the room who's saying, hey guys, this campaign isn't diverse. So that ally has to be able to see beyond themselves, right? Because I think what happened in general is that if I'm, white and I'm looking at campaigns, I don't notice anything is wrong, right? Because I always see myself represented. And that's the come to Jesus moment everyone had, like, what, racism, which was shocking. But it's because you are always represented, so you don't see lack. And so the ally has to be able to see beyond themselves and identify that lack and bring it up in the meetings, And I think part of that is bringing in consultants, because like Toby said, what does your C-suite look like? What is this? I get it, it's white, but how are we going to move forward? That ally needs to say, hey, why don't we bring someone on as a consultant, and then they can help us, bring in a different creative director. Don't use the same creative director to check some boxes. Bring in a new creative director. If you're doing a campaign that's diverse, have someone who's not white run that campaign, even if it's on a consulting basis, because it's going to be hard to change C-suites overnight, right? It's going to be hard to change your staff, but it is very easy to cut a check. And the important part is cut a check to people who can do those roles. And I'll just say this really quickly, in particular in the luxury space. And this, I think, may even go beyond race, but I don't just want free product. Free product is great, thanks, love it. But I don't just want free product, because here's the thing, you're gonna send me your free product, oh, we have no expectation of posting, but in the event you do, here are the hashtags. No, you find value in me, in the relationship that I have with my community, which is why you're sending me your free product. You need to find enough value in me to pay me to post your product. I think that's really important. So this thing on, oh, well, we want to start a relationship by sending you free stuff and you create free content. No, I can afford to buy those things myself. So I think that's really important, that you have to pay creators. And one last thing I'll say in terms of not doing it right. A brand reached out to me, for one of these amplified Black voice things. And then when it came to payment, we settled on a rate, and they said, let us know if you want to donate your pay to a charity of your choice, to a Black charity. And I'm like, no, I'm Black, I am the charity. Like, you can match what you're paying me and donate that match, but don't ask me to give up my money. Like, I just, because it's tone deaf. And I told them about themselves. And I think the other thing is, and this is the last point, brands, you have to be open to hearing us. It's an email oftentimes, so it might come off super harsh, but don't add tone to an email. It's just words, but really take it in and really listen, because I'm the type of person, if a brand, the brand who asked me to give away my pay, I told them about themselves. We still did the campaign, but I felt like I had to tell them, this is tone deaf. You cannot come and ask a Black person to do something and then ask me to donate my pay. That's not what this is about, because then I'm working for free, So I think, it's about seeing beyond yourself and making sure that what you're doing isn't tone deaf, and just check yourself and try to say, if the shoe were on the other foot, how would I feel if this were happening to me?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about like part of that process from a brand perspective likely means that they need to be thinking differently than they have been in the past, which means like they have to start breaking out of their echo chambers and start looking at things differently. Before we get into the next piece, Grace, I want to give you a moment to chime in. Any other sort of like last words when it comes to what you expect or would like to see from allies across the industry? Oh, you're on mute.
Allyship is really tricky, even though it shouldn't be. It should be very obvious. But I think the biggest thing is that a lot of brands and people behind the brands have to just take the ego out of the work they're doing and really identify what's the lack. And I think it's, at the beginning, like there was a lot of people that were jumping to be allies without fully understanding the depth of what it meant and the sacrifices mentally of what they had to take to understand different perspectives. So I think it's just, back to the point of like what Jessica and Toby is saying, just like really understanding how to be more genuine and real with people and look out for people in an authentic way, and understand that the playing field is not level. And you have to go beyond the obvious steps that you would take to make sure that all voices are included.
So I guess to that piece then, thinking about how brands can start to break outside of their echo chambers or even break outside of their scrolls when they want to start engaging with different audiences, when they want to start thinking about how to expand their audiences. I think oftentimes the question becomes, well, how do I find these people, right? I think Toby mentioned earlier, how do I find these people, or they don't exist? Likely because they probably haven't done the work or like the effort to look. So what is some advice at a high level that you would give, the folks that you're working with and partnering with on how they can break out of their echo chambers, break out of their scrolls, and think and approach campaigns and partnerships a little bit differently that also, ultimately allow them to tap into the audience that you have amassed and have like influence over, an audience that also, trust you?
I have two pieces of advice. So number one, and I briefly mentioned it before, I think bringing people in as consultants is really, really important. Because a lot of people say, oh, can I pick your brain? Sure, my brain costs X number of dollars per hour to pick. But I think that's really important. And I think also like diversifying, not just creative directors, but also photographers. I have very dark skin. A lot of white photographers do not know how to light and shoot me. You know what I mean? And so if you're doing a diverse campaign, you cannot then still have everybody white still doing everything, because there is a difference. And again, it's about understanding that. And you can understand that by bringing on consultants, by bringing on people who, you may not work with otherwise. And the other thing I will say it's so difficult to find these people. Here's a trick. If you can find just one person whose aesthetic you like, go and see who they follow. Because a lot of people who have really great aesthetic, they follow other people who have a really great aesthetic. And I think that is a way, like, you're like, oh, okay, I like Grace's style or whatever. Let me see who she follows, because she follows probably people she's inspired by, brands that she likes, and other people with a similar aesthetic. So that's like a little cheat code. If you feel like, oh my God, I can only find one, go see who they follow and you'll find more.
Toby or Grace, any thoughts? Grace, you're on mute.
I think it's really important for brands to start partnering with agencies that are diverse in the first place. I think that is something I find very funny, just like when people say they can't find talent. It's like there are specific agencies that are created by Black women and men that you, like, if you can't find one person on the streets, like there's index of, like I recently worked on this universal standard campaign, and it's through an agency called Stack Studio, but they partnered with 18th and Park, which is a huge, great agency that puts on programs like that. And of course, like Day One as well. So I think that's the first step that to take if if they're having any trouble, which it shouldn't be a thing at this moment, which is, I think it's a lame excuse. But I also think that looking into different pledges that they can be part of, such as a 15% pledge, which is moving to have more Black brands on shelves. So if you aren't finding influencers that have brands ready that you can, or like influencers to promote your brand, maybe doing a collaboration with them and featuring on these shelves of these other of these bigger brick and mortar stores. So there's definitely ways to go even beyond the social realm of making sure that the voices are heard, like in, you know, the physical, like the streets, basically. So yeah, those are just the two things I would advise if, you know, they're having any trouble finding consultants for some reason, or influencers that are diverse. Look at agencies and look at different pledges that they can be part of to become, you know, just more inclusive.
Yeah, and Henry, from a data standpoint, I think like brands and agencies obviously, hopefully acknowledge that like it's a blend of both like the data, the audience, the demographics, right? Of like who they're trying to reach or speak to, or how they're, or the where they're trying to expand their audience. But there's also the art piece too, like how do you collaborate, partner, which a lot of these are a lot of our, you know, panelists of speaking about. But anything you want to add from a data perspective?
Definitely. I mean, you know, first of all, Toby brings up a great point, right? Sometimes, you know, creators, there's a lot of people out there, you know, of all kinds of different representations and of all kinds of sorts, color, creed, whatever it is, and they can be hard to find, you know, and that's kind of where I think Julius, other platforms like Julius have entered the space, is to aid brands in the discovery of all kinds of different creators. I think one thing that's really helpful is to work with, you know, people who have organic stories that can actually lend themselves well to, you know, whatever the content of the campaign is. So making sure that you have a way to quickly find them is critical. And then also understanding their audience is something that you guys all just spoke about. And I want to just highlight the fact that it's really hard to know just by looking at someone's Instagram who follows them, right? You could go through a couple followers, but that's not really scalable. So, you know, having audience data when you're working with an influencer is a great way to make sure, exactly like Zany said, that you're not just working with a diverse set of creators, but you're also working with a diverse set of audiences. And from a business perspective, what we've seen is that that's just a smart business decision, including, you know, on top of being the right thing to do. You know, these markets are called emerging markets for a reason. You know, there's a lot of spending power in the USH community, in the USAA community, in the BIPOC, LGBTQIA plus community. You know, all of these are underrepresented communities that haven't been spoken to enough on social media. And we're seeing trends towards people now identifying those as target audiences. And that's a really good movement that, you know, I think from both a business and a brand perspective is smart play.
And I think you bring up a good point. And I think there's value in brands. I know we'll talk about brand strategy for hopefully the next 5 minutes, but I think there's value in brands also, you know, partnering early on with some of those emerging creators. I think there's oftentimes you see brands that want to engage with a specific community, but they haven't before. So they don't know how to approach it, or their measures of success are different, or they're using sort of the same formula when engaging a different community. And so all those pieces need to be shifted if you are going to approach something truly like authentically and differently. And I think one of the best ways for a brand is to partner with a creator, bring them inside behind the scenes, but then also partner with them as they grow and evolve in their career. And it becomes this like mutually collaborative, mutually beneficial relationship, and then enhances like the advocacy of a brand too. But I'll kick it over to you, Henry.
Yeah, guys. So, you know, it's crazy. Like this conversation is flowing so well. It's, you know, it's crazy to think that we only have 14 minutes left and we want to leave some time for questions. Guys, just one quick reminder as we wrap, the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen is where you can ask your questions. We really want to leave enough time to have our panelists, our great panelists, organically just respond to the questions you guys have. So please continue to drop those in there. But, you know, guys, as we head towards Q&A, one thing I really want to ask you guys is, you know, there are obviously some brands out there that have not embraced working with, you know, underrepresented creators, but now they want to, right? They're waking up to the fact that this is not just the right thing to do. We've already established a smart business decision as well. And it's just, generally the move, right? So, for those people who are new to the game, if you will, what advice do you have for them as a way to sort of get started?
It kind of ties into the answer I was going to give to the last question in terms of what brands can do differently. From an agency side of things, one thing I hear constantly, and Jessica highlighted this as well, right? The C-suite isn't going to change overnight. But often you find, even at senior management, there's this glass ceiling that people of color never really quite break through for one reason or another. And I'm thinking the way to get around that, to change the C-suite and to have, rather than just forcing a hire, like, we have a quota of people that we need to meet in order to kind of get people in, because the decision makers are, if they're all of a certain demographic and certain characteristic group, then those decisions are constantly going to be the same. And I'm just thinking that mentorship, and like Zaini, you said, right, like building these relationships over time. I think, companies need to plan. If you fail to, fail to prepare to fail. We need to plan and have initiatives where we're like, okay, cool, we haven't been doing this right for X amount of time. What are we going to do to change this? So we need people of color in more senior positions. They need to be the decision makers. I've sat in rooms before where there's been, campaigns which are meant to be aimed at Black people, and then you have a great group of creatives in a room, and then you see the decisions being made, and they trickle in all the way up to the top, and then the person at the top, who's, I know what advertising is, or I know how this campaign should go. They override everything, all that work that's just been done, and they just, pardon my language, crap all over the work that's been done, and they don't empower any of those people in that room. None of those people get promoted, and often there's been occasions when those people are they're going above and beyond to do that campaign because they're like, oh, you're Black, you'll love this project, so you should jump on. So the incentive to kind of have something that they can own, which will then be used to kind of promote them or help them in their career, then gets taken away from them, and then you're left with these deflated people of color who put their passion, their creativity, their heart and soul into this creative, which just gets decimated by, I don't know if I want to use the term white gaze, but it just gets decimated by someone who may not understand it. They don't relate to it, and they don't understand why it's not going to connect with the audience. But, in many cases, who are you, despite your seniority, to say that this isn't going to connect with the people who it's designed by, But
Right. And Grace, you're a creator yourself, and you're someone who captures content. Can you speak to any of the sort of good best practices for people, again, who are kind of newer to working in this space? And I'm sorry to do it again, but you're muted. I'm so sorry.
I think that it's if you're new to the space, the best thing to practice just is respectability policies. Like, I know it's like going back to kindergarten, but it's just in the way that people communicate. Like what Toby was saying, having a creative do a project, and maybe someone at the top head is like not sure of how they wanted to perform or to be to evolve into, and then the person that suffers for it is a creative at the end who's like like frightened that they didn't do enough job. So it's just like being really clear with communications and needs and desires, so no one's time is wasted, but also just being respectful with the fact that not only are you working with a creative of color, you're bringing someone on board who's had to deal with a lot of years of possible trauma around just being that person in that space. So it's different than, like, at some point, I think for me to help with just like managing all the new brands I'm working with, I had to come with just like a specific like business mentality and do away with all the things I've dealt with and just come and just say like, hey, like it's all love and in games, but these are the things that you've kind of effed up on, and we have to, moving forward, you can't do that with anyone else because I will be the kindest person to tell you. So it's just like just having respect and knowing that you can't have any ego when you come in and try to create work with new people. But it's important to achieve specific business goals, of course, always. That's bottom line. But just having soul and maturity to understand the perspectives of otherness is very important.
If I could build on that quickly, I think, you know, if I could like whisper in brands' ears, I think there's like a handful of things that I would say in my experience, like both working in this industry and just inherently thinking from a place of inclusion because I am a woman of color. I think there's a couple of things, like one, Toby mentioned it briefly, but the idea of a brand sort of like rinsing and repeating the same messaging or sort of process for like to engage a different community that looks and speaks and engages and reacts differently is not going to work. Like that's not like a long-term solution. So I think, and if they don't have the knowledge or the know-how or the people to inform the strategy that represent that community, then like to Jessica's point, bring in the consultants to help you do it and do it in an authentic way. And then you have to be able to, I think from a brand side, you got to loosen the reins just a little bit. You got to let people, if your goal is to engage in a community that you want your brand to interact with, and you want to build like advocacy among that community, you want that community to be ultimately become a customer or consumer of your brand, you have to let the partners that you're working with be able to share stories in their own tone, in their own way, in their own like creative expression. That's the reason why they've amassed like a certain following, or they have this community, because they trust them. And largely, a lot of times these communities aren't being spoken to or engaged with in other realms. So they do put a lot more trust in like, you know, the people that they've built relationships with across social. So I think, you know, from a brand perspective, like establishing that like the rules need to shift a little bit. And then obviously like baseline, like equity across the board is obviously like always important. That should always be something that everyone is striving for. I'm looking at the clock. I know we only have a few more minutes, and I know we said we have to leave time for Q&A. Jessica, do you want to add something?
Super quickly. Just like as a creator, how can a brand approach me? Number one, I'm still a person. I am Black, but I'm still a person. So I think we have to get away from this idea of like, how do I speak to the Black person? Speak to me like you speak to the white person. I think that's really important to like, so lose that like up front. Don't think you have to think of a new way to approach me. Approach me the exact same way that you approach a white creator, with respect and with an understanding of my value. And I think tied to that is, don't send me a generic email. Speak to me, say, oh, I see you did this, this, and this. I loved that. I love this specifically, because then it makes me understand upfront that you value what I'm doing and you know what I'm doing.
That's a good point. And I think our first question, which leads into our first question around authenticity.
What a segue, wow.
I know. Our first question from Kathy: what sort of brand partnership opportunities excite you and feel authentic?
I'll say really quickly, I love when a brand comes to me and they're just like, this is the product, this is like maybe like the theme, do your thing, you know, come with us with some creative. I just prefer when the brand just lets me do my thing, because I know how to speak to my audience. So for me, I like when there are no boundaries. Like, of course, you may have like a tagline, but beyond that, just let me apply it to me and what I do and do my thing.
Yeah, guys, so the next question, diversity and inclusion, as we've all acknowledged, it's a critical, but it's also a complex goal. You know, how do brands how do brands find well-credentialed guides, and what are measures of success? Like, how do we determine a successful campaign that has successfully included, you know, underrepresented creators? That's a great question.
Yeah, I think from a brand perspective, I do think you need to implement, it's not ideal, but I do think because there is such a lack, you have to implement some sort of process at first, whether it's like there is a certain, like if you're trying to reach a certain market or audience, you need to like at minimum, like have a certain number of, not number, but like a diversity of stories is what I like to call it, because then it showcases like the array of like the ways a story or a brand message can be told. And I think, again, like the equity piece is also really critical. I think you should be measuring yourself as a brand on the equity piece. I'm sure the creators have a separate point of view.
I second all of that, but hire more Black people.
Fair.
that will, I'm not trying to be facetious or anything. Hire more Black people, everything will start to work out.
I was just gonna say really quickly, I think a measure of success is doesn't feel forced, which, right, obviously that's subjective, it's not objective, but it shouldn't feel so obvious, like I took a Black person and I put them into this scene, you know what I mean? So you have to finesse it.
And Jessica, isn't the best way to do that, like allowing the creators to have a little bit more of a say of the creative? Like, this is something that we've always shared as a best practice on the Julius side with as part of our consulting practice is, these guys are creatives on their own. They should have a little bit of a say. They know their audience really well. Like, this seems like that time-tested, make sure you let the people who have that creative ability showcase that ability, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And sorry, I was going to say really quickly, create safe spaces for the creators, because I know, like, I speak my mind. So, like, I've been on set and there was a stylist on set styling me, and I was just like, no, I would not wear this. This is not, you didn't have me in mind when, like, your stylist didn't consider me. She just brought whatever she would have brought. And just again, on that side, I was on a shoot for a very high-end brand, and I had to do my own makeup because the makeup artist could not do my makeup. So it's thinking, because that's going into like more commercial stuff where you're on set and stuff, but considering the creator and creating a safe space where a creator can asking for feedback. So, like, I told the stylist, like, no, this isn't my style. You have to go and try again. Because I'm that type of person, but the brand has to, like, set the tone so that the creator or whomever, whatever the talent feels like they can sort of push back. I think safe spaces are important.
I absolutely agree with that. I think there's sometimes we forget with social media influence in that it's a part or an evolution of advertising, right? And I think for some people, when they talk about advertising, they still thinking of like Mad Men and stuff, right? And I think some of the people who probably were, Mad Men was based on are probably still working, or, there's still some of that influence there, right? That kind of, not throwing any shade, but white male kind of mentality when it comes to stuff. And I think ultimately we're working in a creative industry, right? And as soon as people start taking the view that, oh, we've always done it this way, that's where creativity dies. It's something I try not to employ in any of my creative aspects. Use it as a template, but like at some point you have to break the mold, right? You have to really start to, innovation doesn't come out of, we've always done it that way. So I think that's the mindset we really need to get away from, this kind of madman mentality. It doesn't help us and push the creativity forward.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap because it's 4:00 Eastern. But thank you so much to you all. I mean, I think we could keep going and going and going with the conversation. It's inspiring. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Really quickly, before everyone drops, can you all share your handle or where everyone can learn more about you, see more of your work, etc.? Grace, I'll start with you.
You can find me on Instagram at Bukumi Grace. Twitter and Facebook are a little bit on the low right now. So.
Grace, you on TikTok yet?
I'm trying to avoid it, but I'm actually working on a project right now. So.
Don't resist the inevitable, Grace.
I have to do it.
That's okay.
I'm gonna jump on what's it called?
Clubhouse.
Because I find it so interesting. I think it's a really interesting platform.
How about you, Jessica?
You can find me everywhere at the Catch Me If You Can. I'm not on TikTok. I have an account, but I don't tick nor talk.
It's a great name.
Thank you.
Toby.
At Toby Shinobi, the exact spelling you've got there, TOBISHINOBI, at Toby Shinobi on everything. And please DM me. I answer all DMs unless you're being belligerent. But yeah, I'm around. So let's connect.
My DMs.
And don't be belligerent, right?
Don't be belligerent. Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I'm so glad that I got to be a part of it. And, thank you also to everyone who attended, all the great questions you guys asked. And we're really hoping that this started some really thought-provoking, conversations internally at your respective businesses, at your respective companies, even if you're self-employed, if you work on your own, this is an important conversation for us all to have. And so, big thank you. And this was just a great pleasure to be a part of.
Likewise. Thank you everyone so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.